You know what time it is? Woo! Get into it. Hi. Hi, happy people. Welcome back with Storytime with Chris. We're in a different setup today. I'm in my armchair today. I think that's what I'm going to do is occasionally switch up. Oh my goodness. Hold on one second before I begin. Get myself together. I got a little excited because I missed last week for Storytime. So I'm back. Now, I did an explanation on Instagram for those who were able to see that video, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about why I could not do story time for Charlotte's Web on Sunday and why I couldn't do it for Monday with Taran Wanderer. So I was at work Sunday and I was bartending. I was in the midst of doing my cleanup and putting away all of my materials in the dish tank area, and I'm hanging out with my coworkers and talking. And unfortunately, one of the glass racks slipped off the shelf and hit me in the back of the head, and I blacked out. I am perfectly fine. At the moment, I'm still having some residual headaches. So I wouldn't say perfectly fine, of course, but I went to urgent care. I don't have a concussion. They said I had some mild blunt force trauma to the back of my head, but to monitor me and stuff like that. So I wasn't able to sleep for 5 to 6 hours that day once I got back. But I have since been taken care of. I want to give a huge shout out to my management team over at Ellie's, as well as the Mills Park Hotel. Thank you to all of my coworkers that responded immediately when I fell. And thank you to Andrew, my friend Kyler, Gage, Becky, Peter, everybody. Sarita, Miranda, Caroline, everybody that was there to check in on me, make sure I was okay and be supportive. I do appreciate you. So I didn't come here to gush. However, I came here to read stories. Lots of stories. So I'm going to try something a little bit different where I kind of hold the mic up a little closer to give more vocal color. So last time we were here, oh, what chapter am I? Oh, okay. I was like, did I just skip a page? And I did. There it is. Alright, so I'm going to use my non-dominant hand to hold. There we go. That's better. So the last time we were here, Taran had been accosted by these Border Patrol warriors from the Cantreve of Gorion, who is very much pompous, full of himself, and thinks of himself as a great lord when in fact he's quite foolish and capricious and very attitudinal and prideful. Prideful is a word that describes an individual who they're the type of person, if they didn't come up with it themselves, they don't want to do it. Prideful is to describe someone who is wanting to make something of themselves on their own merit without the help of others. And if you've heard the phrase swallowing one's pride, it's to refer to someone who does not easily like to ask for help because of their pride. Their pride makes them strong and self-sufficient and independent, but there are times where you can't do everything by yourself, and you have to admit that. And it's okay to admit your flaws and idiosyncrasies when you're not able to do something. That does not mean that you are not self-sufficient. That does not mean that you are not capable. That does not mean that you don't know how to do the job. It's just that it's okay to speak up, and I've had to learn this lesson very frequently for myself. It's okay to speak up when you need help. And so now that Taran has successfully eluded the Lord to give back his silver stallion Melala so he can continue his journey, and he's now journeying to King Smoit's kingdom. So we're going to see what happens next and see if we can get another clue on this object, this artifact he's trying to find called the Mirror of Lunette. So let's begin. Chapter 4. A matter of cows. Later that afternoon, the companions sighted the crimson banner of the House of Smoit, its black bear emblem flying bravely above the towers of Caer-Cadarn. Unlike the palisaded strongholds of the Cantreave lords, Smote's castle was a fortress with walls of hewn stone and iron-studded gates, thick enough to withstand all attack. The chips and the stones and the dents in the portal told Taran the castle had indeed thrown back not a few assaults. For the three travelers, however, the gates were flung about willingly, and an honor guard of spearmen hastened to escort the companions. The red-bearded king sat at the dining table in his great hall, and from the array of dishes, platters, and drinking horns, both full and empty, Taran judged Smoit could scarcely have left off eating since breakfast. Seeing the companions, the king leapt from his throne of oak wood, fashioned in the shape of a gigantic bear, looking much like Smoit himself. "My body and bones!" Smoit roared so loudly the dishes rattled on the table. "It's better than the feast to see all of you! Ho, 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 ho!" His battle-scarred face beamed with delight, and he flung his burly arms around the companions in a joint-cracking hug. "Scrape out a tune for that old pot of yours," he cried to Fluter. "A merry tune for a merry meeting. And you, my lad," he went on, seizing Taran's shoulders with his heavy, red-furred hands, "when last we met, you looked scrawny as a plucked chicken. And your shaggy friend, what has he rolled in the bushes all the way from Caerdalban?" Smoit clapped his hands, shouted for more food and drink, and would hear nothing of Taran's news until the companions had eaten and the king had downed another full meal. Which reminds me of the great Pavarotti. Pavarotti was an amazing opera singer and just was a giant. This man was a giant, and he just was an incredible singer, was an amazing baritone. Forgive me if I'm shifting the camera because I'm trying to make sure that y'all can at least see me as I'm talking and whatnot. But Pavarotti, if I'm not mistaken, I remember reading articles about this as a kid. Pavarotti would eat a lot of food, a lot of Italian pasta, a lot of food after a big performance. And you couldn't tell, honestly. Probably not until he was much older, but he loved merriment. He loved art and cuisine and elegance. And he just had this power about himself. Also, fun fact, Pavarotti was also really cool friends with Aretha Franklin. Fun fact. Look how music crosses over. I just wanted to say that because it just reminded me. The fact that King Smoit downed another meal before he could hear his friends' story is very reminiscent of that. That's why I brought that up. "The Mirror of Lunette," said Smoit when Taran at last was able to tell of his quest. "I've heard of no such thing. As well seek a needle in a haystack as a looking-glass in the Lagardern Mountains." The king's heavy brow furrowed, and he shook his head. "The Lagardarns rise in the land of the free comets, and whether the folk there will be of a mind to help you—" "The free comets?" Taran asked. "I've heard them named, but how know little else about them." "They're hamlets and small villages." "Yes," Fluter put in. "They start to the east of the hill Cantreaves and spread as far and great as Great Avrin. I've never journeyed there myself. The free comets are a bit far even for my ramblings. But the land itself is the pleasantest in Prydain. Far hills and dales, rich soil to farm and sweet grass for grazing. There's iron for good blades, and gold and silver for fine ornaments. Anlaw, clay shaper, is said to dwell among the common folk, as do many other craftsmen. Master weavers, metalsmiths, from time out of time their skills have been the comet's pride." "A proud folk they are," said Smoit, "and a stiff-necked breed. They bow to no Cantreave lords, but only to the High King Math himself." "No Cantreave lords?" asked Taran, puzzled. "Who then rules them?" "Why, they rule themselves," answered Smoit. "Strong and steadfast they are, too, and by my beard I'm sure there's more peace and neighborliness in the free comets than anywhere else in Prydain. And so what need have they for kings or lords? When you come to the meat of it," he added, "a king's strength lies in the will of those he rules." Taran, who had been listening closely to these words of Smoit, nodded his head. "I had not thought of it thus," he said, half to himself. "Indeed, true allegiance is only given willingly." Enough talk, cried Smoit. It hurts my head and dries my gullet. Let's have more meat and drink. Forget the mirror. Tarry with me and my cantreve lad. We'll ride to the hunt, feast, and make merry. You'll put more flesh on your bones here than scrambling about on a fool's errand. And that, my boy, is good counsel to you. Nevertheless, when he finally saw that Taran would not be dissuaded, Smoit good-naturedly agreed to give the companions all they needed for the journey. Next morning, after a huge breakfast, which Smoit declared would serve to whet their appetites for dinner, the king threw open his storehouse to them and went with them to be sure they chose the best of gear. Taran had only begun sorting through coils of rope and saddlebags and harness leather when one of the castle guards burst into the storeroom. Hold on one second. Okay. Sorry, my apologies, y'all. Somebody was trying to send me a message. There we go. Sire, a horseman of Lord Gast has come. Raiders from Lord Gorion's stronghold have stolen Gast's prize cow, and the rest of the herd with her. My pulse, roared Smoit, my breath and blood. The king's tangled bush of eyebrows nodded, and his face turned as red as his beard. How does he dare stir trouble in my cantreve? The men of Gast have armed. They ride against Gorion, the guard hastened on. Gast craves your help. Will you speak to his messenger? Speak to him, bellowed Smoit. I'll clap his master in irons for breaking the peace, and worse, for breaking it without my leave. Put Gast in irons? Taran asked with some perplexity. But Gorion stole his cow. His cow? Cried Smoit. His cow indeed. Gast stole her from Gorion himself last year, before that the other way around. Nevertheless, neither of them knows whose beast it rightly is. Those two brawlers have been at loggerheads. Now the warm weather heats their blood again, but I'll cool their tempers. In my dungeon, Gast and Gorion both! Smoit snatched up a mighty double-edged battle-axe. I'll fetch them back by the ears, he roared. They know my dungeons, they've been there often enough. Who rides with me? I will, cried Fluter, his eyes lighting up. Great Beelard, a flam never shuns a fight. If you ask our help, sire, Taran began, we give it willingly, but... Mount up then, my lad, shouted Smoit. You'll see justice done, and I'll have peace between Gast and Gorion if I have to break their heads to gain it. Swinging his battle-axe, Smoit bolted from the storeroom, bellowing orders left and right. A dozen warriors sprang to horse. Smoit leapt astride a tall, barrel-chested steed, whistled through his teeth almost loudly enough to break them, and waved his men onward, and amid the shouting and confusion, Taran, bewildered, found himself atop Melilas galloping across the courtyard and out the castle gate. The red-headed king set a pace throughout the valleys that he put even Lion on her mettle to keep up, while Gurgi, with most of the wind pounded out of him, clung to the neck of his frantically galloping pony. Smoit's warhorse was in a lather, and so was Melilas before the Cantreve king signaled a halt. Hold on one second. To meet! Smoit cried, swinging out of the saddle and looking as unwearied as if he had just begun a morning's trot. The companions stood catching their breath, had by no means found their appetites, but Smoit clapped his hands to the heavy bronze belt around his middle. Hunger makes a gloomy man and saps all the spirit from the battle. Sire, must we battle with Lord Gast? Taran asked with some concern, for Smoit's warband numbered only the dozen who had ridden from Carcadarn. And if Lord Gorion's men have armed, we may be too few to stand against all of them. Battle? Smoit retorted. No more's the pity. I'll have those troublemakers by the nose and into my dungeons before nightfall. They'll do as I command. I'm their king, by my beard. There's brawn enough here, he added, shaking a mighty fist, to make them remember it. And yet, Taran ventured to say, you yourself told me a king's true strength lay in the will of those he ruled. How's that? Cried Smoit, who had settled his bulk against a tree trunk and was about to attack the joint of meat he had pulled from his saddlebag. Don't puzzle me with my own words. My body and bones, a king is a king. I meant only that you've locked Gast and Gorion in your dungeon many times before, Taran answered, and yet they still quarrel. Is there no way to keep peace between them, or make them understand? I'll reason them reasons, bellowed Smoit, clutching his battle axe. He knitted his jutting brows. But true enough it is, he admitted, frowning and seeming to chew at the thought as if it were gristle in his meat. They go surly to the dungeon and surly leave it. You've struck on something, my lad. The dungeon's useless against that pair, and my pulse, I know why. It needs more dampness, more draught. So be it. I'll have the place well watered down tonight. Taran was about to remark that his own thought was otherwise, but Fluter called out and pointed to a horseman galloping across the meadow. He wears the colors of Gorion, shouted Smoit, jumping to his feet, still holding the joint in one hand and the battle axe in the other. A joint of meat and a battle axe. Meat and weapons, meat and weapons. No, just kidding. Two of the warriors quickly mounted and, drawing swords, spurred to engage the rider. But the horseman, brandishing his weapon hilt downward, cried out that he bore tidings from the Cantreve lord. You rogue! Smoit bellowed, dropping both meat and axe and collaring the rider to haul him bodily from the saddle. What other mischief's afoot? Speak! Give me your news, man, or I'll have it out of you along with your gizzard. Sire, gasped the messenger, Lord Gast attacks in strength. My Lord Gorion is hard-pressed. He has ordered more of his warriors to arm and calls on you to help him as well. What of the cows? Cried Smoit. Has Gast won them back? Does Gorion still hold them? Actually, I'm gonna try something. Alright, that shit. Okay, that works. That works. I can not have to hold it. Neither, sire, answered the messenger as well as he could with Smoit shaking him between every word. Lord Gast attacked Lord Gorion to regain his herd and take Lord Gorion's too. But as they fought, all the beasts frighted and ran off. The cows? Sire, both herds are gone. Lost, every soul of them, and Cornillo herself. Let that be the end of it, declared Smoit, and a good lesson for all cow robbers. Gast and Gorion shall cry peace, and I'll spare them from my dungeon. Sire, the fighting grows hotter, the messenger said urgently. Neither one will leave off. Each blames the other for loss of his herd. Lord Gorion swears vengeance on Lord Gast, and Lord Gast swears vengeance on Lord Gorion. They've both been itching for battle, Smoit burst out. Now they find their excuse. He summoned one of his warriors, ordering him to take Gorion's messenger to Caer Cadarn. They are to be held as hostage. To horse, the rest of you, Smoit commanded. My body and bones will see sport after all. He gripped his axe. Oh, there'll be heads broken today, he cried with relish, and his battered face brightened as if he were on his way to a feast. The bards will sing of this, exclaimed Fluter, carried away by Smoit's ardor. A flam in the thick of battle, the thicker the better. The harp shuddered and a string snapped in two. I mean, Fluter hastily added, I hope we're not too, badly outnumbered. Sire, Taran called as Smoit strode to his warhorse, if Gast and Gorion won't stop because of their herds are lost, shouldn't we try to find the cows? Yes, Gurgi pointed. Find cows gone with strings, and put an end to fightings and smitings. But Smoit had already mounted and was shouting for the warband to follow, and Taran could no more than gallop after him. To which stronghold Smoit was leading them, Taran did not know. As far as Smoit was concerned, Taran decided it made little difference whether Gast or Gorion fell first into the king's hands. In a while, however, Taran recognized the path he and Gurgi had taken from Adan's farm, and he judged now that Smoit would make for Gorion's stronghold. But as they pounded across an open field, the king veered sharply left, and Taran glimpsed a troop of mounted warriors some distance ahead. At the sight of their banners, Smoit bellowed furiously and spurned his steed to overtake the horsemen, but the riders themselves, galloping at top speed, quickly vanished into the woodland. Smoit reined up, shouting after them and shaking his huge fist. Has Gorion put more warriors in the fray? Roared Smoit, his face crimson. Then Gast has done the same. Those louts wore his colors. Sire, Taran began, if we can find the cows... Cows? Burst out Smoit. There's more than cows in this, my lad. Such a brawl can spread like a spark through tinder. Those thick-skulled ruffians will set the whole of Candafor ablaze, and next thing you know, we'll be at one another's throats. But by my beard, they'll learn my fist smites harder than theirs. Smoit hesitated, and his face darkened with deep concern. He scowled and tugged at his beard. The lords of the next country, he muttered. They'll not stand idle, but strike against us when they see we're fighting each other. But the cows, Taran urged. The three of us can seek them while you... The dungeon, cried Smoit. I'll have Gaston Gorion in it before their squabble gets further out of hand. Smoit clapped heels to his horse and charged forward, making no attempt to hold to any pathway, dashing at breakneck speed. Through bramble and thicket. With the companions and the train of warriors pelting behind, Smoit clattered over the stones of a riverbank and plunged his horse into the swift current. The king had ill chosen his fording place, for in another moment Taran found himself in water up to his saddle horn. Smoit, shouting impatiently, pressed on across the river. Taran saw the king rise up from his stirrups to beckon his followers and urge more haste. But in an instant later, the war horse lost footing and lurched sideways. Steed and rider tumbled with a mighty splash, and before Taran could spur Melilas to him, Smoit had been torn loose from his mount, and like a barrel with arms and legs was being borne quickly downstream. Behind Taran, some of the warriors had turned back, seeking to overtake the king by following along the riverbank. Taran, closer to the opposite bank, urged all strength from Melilas, leapt from the saddle to dry ground, and raced along the shore after Smoit. The sound of rushing water filled his ears, and with dismay, Taran realized the king was being pulled relentlessly to a waterfall. Heart bursting in his chest, Taran doubled his pace, though before he could set foot in the rapids, he saw the king's red beard sink below the churning water, and he cried out in despair as Smoit vanished over the bank. You know, I'll say this. Turn this down. That doesn't need to be super loud anymore. There we go. I'll say this. If you can swim, you'll be fine. Yes, a waterfall is very high-paced, typically. It's usually at a higher elevation. But if you know how to swim, I suggest that you dive down. There may be some rocks at the bottom, but try to dive towards the inner part of the lake or pool that you are coming down on, because any waterfall will either fall towards a riverbed or a lake or a water mass of some kind. So it's very treacherous. I'm glad I took the time to learn how to swim properly at a young age and to take the lessons that I was taught and applying them in my adult life. So with all that being said, I wish you a lovely afternoon on my favorite day of the week, and I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.